The concept of bad bank has come to limelight as our finance minister first spoke about the idea of an entity called as bad bank to address stress debt of rupees 2.25 lakh crore in banking sector. I, Preshit, and my colleague Rishi will be discussing whether this is a good move or a bad one. Let's have a look at the basics of this first. Bad loans. What are bad loans? In simple terms, imagine you lend your money to a person and the person for some reason fails to return your money back to you. The money lended by you becomes a bad loan or non-performing asset for you. A bad loan is an amount owed to a creditor that is unlikely to be paid. So NPA is simply a credit facility whose installments have remained past due for a specific period of time, which is 2 quarters. Let's have a look at the statistics. According to RBI's Trends and Progress Report of 2020, gross NPAs of Indian banks reached 8.2%, which is equivalent to rupees 9 lakh crores at the end of March 2020. The RBI, in its financial stability report, predicted that the gross NPA may increase to 13.5% by September 2021.
Now let's look at what are bad banks. A bad bank is an entity that will absorb the existing NPAs in the banking system and will attempt resolution through a professional approach. The bad loans of 500 crores and above will be eligible for resolution by this entity. A bad bank essentially buys the bad loans of other lenders and financial institutions to help clear their balance sheets. The bad bank then resolves these bad assets over a period of time. So why is there a need for setting up a bad bank now? For post-COVID recovery, it is very important that banks are free of their previous bad loan burden. One way to unburden them quickly is by selling their NPAs to a bad bank. So the main objectives of creation of a bad bank are: number one, to focus on credit growth; number two, to clean the balance sheets of the banks; number three, to enable the banks to reach the required level of capital adequacy and to ultimately promote economic growth.
Now let's have a look at benefits of having bad bank. In India, neither the ARCs nor the banks were ready to bear the losses, and this prolonged the process of recovery. Introduction of bad banks would make the process faster. Although public sector banks would be privatized, they may amount to sell off at an unattractive price or valuation. In this scenario, a bad bank appears to be a good idea. Smaller ARCs do not have the ability to deal with big accounts, the result of which banks are often stuck with these accounts. As against this, the bad banks will have deep pockets to buy out these big accounts and in a way would free up banks. As there will be no equity contribution from the government in the bad bank, this would increase liquidity of the government and save taxpayers' money that could be utilized elsewhere.
Now let's look at some of the drawbacks of a bad bank. The major drawback of this proposal is that there's an initial capital burden on the banks and especially on the public sector banks. These banks are already hit hard by bad loans. A bad bank will not really be solving the problem of NPAs, but will merely be transferring it to another entity. So the core problem still remains unsolved. And once the NPA problem is settled, the bankers may once again become complacent and resume reckless lending. The one size fits all approach to designing a bad bank might be very expensive and inefficient. So let's look at the conclusion. With the arrival of a bad bank, the commercial banks will be able to focus on their core competencies instead of having to worry about recovery of NPAs. Since a bad bank specializes in loan recovery, it is expected to perform better than commercial bank whose expertise lies in lending. The banks can utilize their precious capital now that they don't have to set aside provisions for bad debts. Bad banks could also potentially solve the twin balance sheet problem in India, which occurs when an over-leveraged company is unable to pay back the liability of their loan, and the stressed bank from which it took the loan continues to accumulate bad debt on their balance sheet. So to conclude, the resolution of bad banks and bad loans will help to restore the banking system and the health in the banking system, which is one of the biggest challenges today. It is a challenge that requires efforts on multiple fronts. While a bad bank cannot be the only solution, it is definitely a step in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you.